Khashoggi have left Iran after years in jail in the Islamic Republic. Reuters says this has come from a source close to the family. There have been reports that Nazanin had been released from Iranian detention. She was first arrested in Tehran in 2016, accused of plotting to overthrow Iran's government, which she's always denied. There's so far been no comment from the government, but we may well hear that from Dominic Raab in the House of Commons in just a few moments' time. Elsewhere, the Prime Minister has said it's been made clear to the Russian President there's no way Ukraine is going to join NATO anytime soon. Talks between Russia and Ukraine are set to continue today, but there have been renewed airstrikes earlier this morning in the capital, Kyiv, and reports of explosions in the southern cities of Odessa and Zaporizhzhia. And the Prime Minister is in Abu Dhabi on a trip to the Middle East to seek a new oil deal. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss told Times Radio earlier the UK needs to diversify away from its reliance on Russian energy. We'll bring you a full news and sport update at past, but now it's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio.
Order. I call Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman.
Yes, it's that time of the week. We go live to the House of Commons for Boris Johnson versus Keir Starmer, but it's not today because, as I was just saying, Boris Johnson is in Abu Dhabi. So it's Dominic Raab versus Angela Rayner. Tim Shipman's here. How are you?
Oh, I'm very excited.
Well, Angela Rayner's bound to be very excited because she loves doing it. In fact,
she does. She likes showing off a bit, doesn't she? When Starmer's away. Interesting. If you look at Labour recently, they got a long, decent lead in the polls. That's now closed up. You're starting to see the odd bit in the papers again about, well, is this really going as well as all that? Is Boris Johnson getting away with it again? There was a piece in one of the papers at the weekend talking about the curse of Keir and whether Starmer's just plain unlucky, whereas Boris Johnson's plain lucky. And Angie Rayner will certainly be wanting to show that she can do the job just as well as him. And were people to conclude that he's just too unlucky to carry on, here I am.
Here we are. But just the other day, Angela Rayner was speaking to Aisha Hazawika here on Times Radio. You can catch her on Times Radio Drive on Saturdays and Sundays. And she explained why she loves PMQ so much.
I like debate. I want to have a debate with somebody. And I love getting one up on Boris Johnson at the dispatch box, or when it was Dominic Raab and I told him to get back on his sun lounger. For me, it's like an out-of-body experience, if I can put it that way. It's not me. I'm like, when an actor plays a role, for me, I am Her Majesty's official opposition, and I am everybody who feels aggrieved. I am their voice and I channel it all. So I don't actually think it's me.
And she loves it.
The artist known as Angela Rayner.
Well, if you want to watch along, you can go to the Times Radio YouTube channel. Go to YouTube, search for Times Radio. It'll pop up. We've there's a couple hundred people already here from Indiana, Basingstoke, Leicester, New York, Bedford, Ipswich, all around the world. Let us know where you're watching along as we go live to the House of Commons. This is question number 1 at PMQs. This is Angela Rayner.
Also say on the specific points he makes.
We now come to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I also welcome Ukrainian MPs to this House today. And Mr. Speaker, can I start by wholeheartedly welcoming the positive steps towards returning Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and Anusha Ashuri to the UK. I'm sure members across the House want to show their support for their families and them. I know the Minister would agree that this devastating situation must never be repeated, and other British nationals still trapped in Iran need to be brought home. So will the Minister commit to a review of these cases to understand what more could have been done by the British Government to secure releases, and whether the lazy comments of the Prime Minister worsened the situation?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I'll tell you what, should we just jump in there to
explain
exactly what that question is?
So basically, Boris Johnson was Foreign Secretary when a lot of this stuff happened. I think Nazanin was already in custody, but he is accused of botching attempts to release her by making some incautious comments about whether or not she was working as a journalist. I think some people think that he either didn't read his brief terribly well, or he read out things he wasn't supposed to read out. And it was he's been accused of condemning her to a second sentence and being stuck there. So even though we've got this good news, it's still a stick with which Labour can have a pop at beating the government.
Yeah, he said it back. It was, you're right. I think she was already in detention, but there was then, I think, sentenced by the time he was actually Foreign Secretary under Theresa May. And then a few months later, almost a year later, in November 2017, he said, when I look at what Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe was doing, she was simply teaching people journalism, as I understand it. But that was absolutely not the...
Well, that's what she's always denied doing.
Yes, exactly. That was what she was accused of doing. He was trying to say, well, there was nothing wrong with teaching journalism, and her position was, well, she wasn't doing that. And it was seized on by Tehran, and she was sentenced supposedly to another 5 years as a result.
Who, frankly, probably need a lot of encouragement to seize on anything, because, as we know, Iran was determined to keep her there because they have been wanting Britain to repay this debt of £400 million that lingers from even further back in history. And that appears to be what's about to happen to secure her release.
So we've brought you bang up to date now, the details of Angela Rayner's question. Let's see what Dominic Raab, of course, another former Foreign Secretary who worked on this case for a long time too. Let's get his response.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I first of all say that I can't yet confirm the reports we've seen in the media, but of course it feels like positive signs, and of course no one wants more than me, but I'm sure all members of the House, to see Nazanin, but also all of the arbitrarily detained nationals reunited with their loved ones. I can tell the Honourable Lady, having worked for 2 years with the concerted diplomatic effort led by the Prime Minister, that we have done absolutely everything that we can. She shouldn't give succour to the despotic regime that detained our nationals in Iran or around the world by suggesting it's anyone else's responsibility other than theirs.
Angela Rayner.
Well, there we are, giving succour to the regime if you blame Boris Johnson.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing here is Dominic Raab, was Foreign Secretary for a stretch and did put some effort into this as well. And there will be some people in the government will tell you that the deal that appears to have been done today was effectively one that he put on the table a year ago. So it'd be very interesting to see how much Raab himself, if this line of questioning continues, tries to take a little bit of credit for that rather than allowing Liz Truss to walk away with all the glory.
I mean, particularly, and there was a lot of glory this morning, Tulip Sadiq, who's Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's local MP, told Times Radio this morning, I've dealt with 3 Prime Ministers and 5 Foreign Secretaries. It's finally when I came to a woman who was Foreign Secretary who actually did something. We had a difficult time with the other Foreign Secretaries, speaking to them, trying to convince them about this debt. But she said that when we started speaking to Liz Truss from very early on, it did seem like she was making some sort of plan to pay back the debt. And if she's managed to make it happen, then it's quite an achievement. But yeah, there's nothing quite likely to stir up Westminster than a battle to take the credit for some good news.
Yes, quite.
Or even more so than the battle to try and blame others when there's bad news. Anyway, let's go back to question number 2 then from Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, it's exactly for that reason that I asked for the review, that it's important to learn from our mistakes so we don't end up with other innocent families facing this ordeal again. So I hope the Minister will consider my comments. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank all of the people who have been working tirelessly to bring British nationals home from Iran, our diplomatic staff and our world-leading British intelligence agencies. The role of the British intelligence today is critical in the face of Putin's aggression. The Deputy Prime Minister oversaw our foreign intelligence services as Foreign Secretary. So can he confirm if at any time he overruled or ignored direct advice from the British security services?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I say to the Honourable Lady, what she suggests is nonsense. She's talking about the House of Lords Appointments Commission. They have a vetting process. I have never overruled intelligence advice, and I wouldn't comment on the details of it. What I would say, and would agree with her, on the strength, the agility of the British diplomatic service, which time and time again are the unsung heroes in returning British nationals, often less celebrated cases than this, but I think now is a great opportunity to recognise the heroic work they do.
Well, first of all, that sort of heaping praise on our intelligence agencies and so on is a particularly un-Corbyn thing to do. Part of all of Labour. Labour now loves the British state and all of its institutions.
Very much so.
Tim, can you fill in the gaps on this second question, the second round of questioning for Angela Rayner?
Not really. No, I mean, they're sort of suggesting that that advice was not followed from the spooks, and there have been examples of that in all sorts of arenas recently. But I think on this one, there's a more simple, straightforward story to tell. But
This is Lord Lebedev. Now Lord Lebedev, formerly Evgeny Lebedev, owner of the London Evening Standard, which was of great support to Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister.
Yeah, that's right. And he was big pals with Boris Johnson when he was mayor, and then Boris Johnson secured him a peerage, and it appears to be against the advice of the security services. And if you read your Sunday Times last weekend, you will see that the head of MI6, John Sawyers, suggested that it would be inappropriate for Lebedev to be given access to MI6 when he wanted to go in for a chat and a coffee, and they made it clear that it was an inappropriate. He was an inappropriate character to get a peerage, and Boris Johnson appears to have gone, well, that's just sort of anti-Russianism, and he appears to have overruled it. And the spooks went away and thought carefully about it, and then appear to have changed their minds. But it's a deeply murky and mysterious affair. What no one's yet proved is what Boris Johnson may or may not have said to people that could be problematic. But the process itself appears to be extremely irregular.
That's one way of putting it. Well, let's go back to the House of Commons then. This is question number 3 from Angela Rayner.
Absolutely, I agree with the Minister regarding his comments on their heroic work. The Right Honourable Member was Foreign Secretary on the 17th of March 2020, when British intelligence reportedly warned against the granting of peerage to the Prime Minister's close friend and now Lord Lebedev of Hampton and Siberia. 48 hours later, the Prime Minister visited Lebedev at his home in London. Details of that meeting have never been released. In July 2020, Lebedev's appointment as peer was announced. So can he tell the House what changed between the security warning and the appointment?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Sorry, the honourable lady knows full well all individuals nominated for a peerage have done so in recognition of what their contribution is to society. And I should say, that includes those of Russian origin who contribute brilliantly to our nation, many of whom in this country are critics of the Putin regime. Live peerages are vetted by the House of Lords Appointments Commission for matters of probity, and frankly, I think she should know better.
Oh, he's not enjoying that, is he? He should know better.
No, and it's interesting because he says, many of these Russians are opponents of the Putin regime, and certainly some of the people who the Conservative Party's taken donations from, they would argue are British citizens, some of whom have fled Putin's regime in fear of their lives, and they're perfectly respectable people to take money from. Evgeny Lebedev is someone who has quite often parroted Russian propaganda tropes. He's refused to call the invasion of Crimea an invasion, referred to it as an incursion, I believe. And our paper at the weekend had numerous examples of where he has appeared to take Moscow's side. And his father is acknowledged to have been a former KGB guy who's in Moscow at the moment and is seen as quite close to the regime. So it may be that Evgeny Lebedev isn't close to the regime, but his father certainly seems to have been. And his father seems to have attended some of the events, trips to Italy, that Boris Johnson attended. And that's what has excited opinion on all sides of the House. There is no smoking gun about, as I say, what he did or didn't say or what he did or didn't do. But it ought to be a situation that's uncomfortable for the Prime Minister. He tends to just sort of carry merrily onwards. But
also, it's one of those things. It seemed a strange appointment at the time when he got the peerage, and for whatever other things were happening, and it never really took off as a cause of concern.
Yeah, I mean,
clearly the Russian element has.
Lebedev was important to Johnson because he owned the main newspaper in London, and he helped him get elected.
Yeah.
And they seemed to get on. And in the dinner where Michael Gove and Boris Johnson were contemplating what to do about Brexit, bizarrely, Evgeny Lebedev was there. Even more bizarrely, he was supposed to bring Liz Hurley as his date, but she didn't turn up. You can only imagine.
If we want more than that, there are books available.
There are books available. We can't possibly say who wrote them.
Very good. Let's go back to the House of Commons. Question number 4 from Angela Rayner.
Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, what I do know better is the central duty of any government is to keep the British people safe. There are now widespread reports that the Prime Minister did not accept warnings from our own intelligence services, granting a Russian oligarch, the son and business partner of a KGB spy, a seat here in this Parliament. It shouldn't matter if such a warning was about a close personal friend of the Prime Minister. It shouldn't matter if he gave the Prime Minister thousands of pounds of gifts, and it shouldn't matter how much champagne and caviar he serves. There's no ifs or buts when it comes to the safety of the British people. So I ask the Deputy Prime Minister, can he guarantee that the Prime Minister never asked anyone to urge the security services to revise, reconsider or withdraw their assessment of Lord Lebedev of Hampton and Siberia?
Deputy Prime Minister.
The suggestion she's making is sheer nonsense. But if she wants to talk about national security, then I remind her that she and her shadow cabinet colleagues not so long ago wanted the honourable member for Islington North.
That's Jeremy Corbyn, of course, he's referring to.
I wonder
Mr.
when we get
Speaker,
to
a man
that.
who wanted and talked about abolishing the army, pulling out of Trident, she voted for that. Has there ever been a more ridiculous, reckless, naive moment to call for unilateral nuclear disarmament and pulling out of NATO? A Labour government would put at risk our security. We're doing everything we can to protect it.
Angela Rayner.
Well, there we are.
Yeah, and Raab did well to wait that long to make that point, I suspect. But it does show that, they're under a spot of pressure. I mean, talking about sheer nonsense when this is all fairly well factually attested to. No explanations have been forthcoming from the government.
Do you think did that line of attack from? It is true. I mean, there's a parallel universe where Angela Rayner and Keir Starmer are in Jeremy Corbyn's government, but Jeremy Corbyn isn't even sitting as a Labour MP now. Quite a lot of what Keir Starmer's done has been to distance himself from it.
Yeah, and he's done it successfully enough that line of attack starts to sound a little hoary, doesn't it? And I think, if he's achieved anything, it's that people really don't, for the most part, see the Labour Party like that anymore at all. And the debate is about, more mainstream issues than it was when Corbyn was around. It's, in a debate and, with your back to the wall, it's a perfectly legitimate political argument to make. But one wonders whether it's really that effective for one these days.
Well, we'll see. Let's see how Angela Rayner responds in the House of Commons. It's PMQs Unpacked. You can still watch along on the Times Radio YouTube channel. Let's go back to the House of Commons.
And may I remind the Deputy Prime Minister that it was his Prime Minister in 2015 that said he wasn't sure if it was morally irresponsible to work with Putin. So I don't think he's on safe grounds there. Last week, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, said that Britain should never again be at the mercy of a foreign dictatorship for our energy and fuel security. This week, the Prime Minister has gone cap in hand from one dictator to another on a begging mission to the Saudi prince to bail him out. Mr. Speaker, the government have had 12 years to end their reliance on foreign oil and invest in homegrown energy to secure our supplies. Their failure has left us all vulnerable, relying on another murderous dictator to keep the lights on and pumps open.
I'm going to hear this question. If some people don't want... Somebody want to make a... If you want a little argument, I'm more than happy, because we can argue
Common Speaker Lindsay Hall's not happy
but
again.
for the moment, I need to get on. I want to hear the question. Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government benches have a choice. They could accept Labour's plan to save working families hundreds of pounds on bills funded with a one-off levy on the soaring profits of big energy companies. So I ask the Deputy Prime Minister, is their only plan to keep on begging?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, can I just gently say to the Honourable Lady that when she was campaigning, as the rest of them were, to make the Honourable Member for Islington North Prime Minister, this Prime Minister was Foreign Secretary leading the response to the nerve agent attack.
Lindsay Hoyle again.
You can't keep going back for 12 years as a defensive mechanism. What we want to do, I'll decide, thank you. What I want you to do, Deputy Prime Minister, please, if we can try and stick to the agenda, always have a lot of people ahead of me who are desperate to get in without talking about history. How far we want to go back is one thing in passing. Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When she was...
Order. Sir Desmond is not responsible for the opposition's policies.
Desmond's
this
fine.
is about the government. This is about questions to the Deputy Prime Minister. I'll put the questions and decide which to write. Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted just to point out, and I hope it's not ancient history, that the Prime Minister was, as Foreign Secretary, galvanising the response to the nerve agent attack in Salisbury at the time where the honourable member, the former leader of the Labour Party, was siding with Putin against the UK. What did the Honourable Lady have to say on Sky News? He's a very strong leader. She can't wait for him to become Prime Minister.
They don't look very impressed on the front bench there, Tim Shipman.
Well, I'm not sure either front bench is terribly impressed. I mean, that was actually a pretty bizarre intervention from Lindsay Hoyle, I thought. I mean, he's effectively saying... He talked about it being 12 years ago, but actually it was much more recent than
I
that.
wondered about that. I wondered if that was a reference to some of the heckling about what Labour did, because we had a lot of this last week. Boris Johnson tried to suggest that the fact we don't have enough nuclear power stations now was in fact the result of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown.
Well, I mean, energy policy has been a collective failure of the entire political class, just as building airports has been and building houses has been, and they've all made a mess of it, frankly. They haven't thought long-term enough. And I think both sides can share their share of the blame. But in terms of what Raab specifically was talking about there, he was talking about events that are only really 2 or 3 years ago. It's not ancient history. And really, it shouldn't be the Speaker to tell people what, I mean, yes, it's obviously questions to the government, but, they ought to be allowed to answer it roughly in their own way. And, yeah, I mean, he's keeping labouring the point. And, of course... The irony, of course, is that lots of people in the Labour Party didn't want Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister either, but had to pretend that they did, and now they're having it thrown back in their faces.
And actually, without giving too much away, your Angela Rayners and your Keir Starmers were not...
they weren't his warmest chums.
Privately, were perhaps not as enthusiastic as they may have been publicly.
I think that's fair to say.
But, they did... Some Labour MPs who didn't want Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister quit the party and went off and set up their own. They didn't sit in the shadow cabinet and suggest he should be Prime Minister. So no. it is a point of attack. It's interesting, I suppose, if the Conservative Party at this point in the electoral cycle still think their best line of attack against the Labour Party is to bring up Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, well, it may be their only line of attack when people have a go at them about trotting off to try and get the gas flowing again. But one wonders really what else they're supposed to do. At this point, the Chancellor of the Exchequer is reading up on the 1973 oil shock. The Prime Minister is desperately trying to get the Saudis to turn the taps on, and everybody acknowledges that will make far more difference than anything Rishi Sunak's likely to say in his spring statement. And it's not just for Britain that they'd be doing that. A lower oil price would be good for the whole world, frankly, apart from probably the people selling the oil.
One thing that when Angela Rayner, we played a clip from her, when Angela Rayner was speaking to Aisha on Times Radio about doing PMQs, she said, I only think about it about half an hour before, which I suspect isn't entirely accurate. However, I'm not sure... Maybe
that other people have done some thinking for
I'm not sure this has been the most coherent collection of question. We've had sort of vague reference. We've had to do quite a lot of explaining and unpacking. It's a bit of a muddle. We've had a bit of
It is a muddle, and actually it would have been far more effective with the Prime Minister standing opposite, because most of these questions are ones that pertain to him. And if he's refusing to answer them and squirming over what went on with Evgeny Lebedev, then that has far more impact than watching Dominic Raab do his Undertaker act and sort of try to take the steam out of everything.
I mean, we've so far had Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, we've had Lord Lebedev, we've had we were sort of on to energy bills. It's a bit all over the shop. I'm not sure that we'll necessarily remember this in the annals of history. But
but as you said at the beginning, it is interesting that they're attacking essentially from the right on national security, and that itself is a sort of an interesting development. Even if
we are learning a bit about, maybe use the deputies, they can rehearse these things a little bit. We're learning a bit about both sides' views of how to attack the other.
Yeah.
The Labour Party attacking the government's record on national security, and Dominic Raab responded by talking about Jeremy Corbyn. Well, let's see. Maybe this last exchange is going to be the one for the history books. This is question number 6 from Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, there is a war in Europe. There is a fuel energy crisis in Britain. Democracy is at risk. We must support the courageous efforts of President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people. These uncertain times require leadership with integrity. A leader that works with the security services, can be trusted to say the right thing for British diplomacy and provide security for the British people. Instead, Mr. Speaker, we have this sorry excuse of a government sat before us. They hike tax on 27 million working people while the super rich increase their wealth. They watch energy prices rise by over 50% while the companies enjoy profits they didn't even expect. And they cavort with Russian oligarchs in luxury villas while neglecting the security of the British people. And remember, Mr. Speaker, they partied while the country was in lockdown and were unable to see their dying loved ones. Can the Deputy Prime Minister look the British people in the eye and really say this government is doing their best in their interest?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you what this government, this Prime Minister have done. 1,000 Russian individuals sanctioned, a combined wealth $45 billion. The impact of the sanctions and the diplomatic effort that this Foreign Secretary and this Prime Minister have led, the ruble plummeting, the Russian stock market at record lows, doubled the interest rates. We've also showed, Mr. Speaker, the big-hearted spirit of this government and indeed this nation, with the 5,500 visas granted to Ukrainians to come here, and also the humanitarian route, which has now got 100,000 sponsors applying to come to take Ukrainian families in these homes. While she's in her social media echo chamber, that's what this government is doing.
Oh, social media echo chamber.
Yes, I mean, very kind of punchy stuff there. And, Rayner is someone who likes to dabble on Twitter. And Dominic Raab is very much not someone who likes to dabble on Twitter. But, it was a robust sort of clip for Rayner.
Do you know what, I've not got my bell in here today. I've left my digging bell in the office. I think if I'd rung it every time she used the word security in that last answer, it's entirely possible it might have broken off.
Yes, the message was there, I think. And, if we take anything away, it's probably that the big picture, that they think they can have a pop at the government on this, and it's not a situation Tory governments are used to finding themselves in. I did think Dominic Raab talking about the big-hearted 5,500 visas was, I'm not quite sure how big that heart is, but,
Well, let's take a look at some of the responses that we've got. Angela Rayner does not sound like a politician, says Mimi. Her voice grates and the content of her speeches is inferior and unworthy of a politician. We've also got Cameron saying Angela Rayner pretty useless today, to be honest. Lindsay Hoyle was absolutely right to intervene in that way, says someone on Twitter. It may not be traditional custom, but someone, and if not him, then who has to make this sleepy, cheating government? Oh, they've just cut off. But I think we get the gist of that. Others, though, saying the Speaker shouldn't be dictating the parameters of debate. And so on. Anyway, that brings us to the end of PMQs Unpacked, the main event between Dominic Raab and Angela Rayner. Stay on YouTube. and you can carry on watching along. We will bring you the best of the rest. We will do that. Okay. We will do the best of the rest next, and of course we'll do the quiz as well. You listen to Matt Chorley on Times Radio.
Mariella Frostrup, this afternoon from 1 on Times Radio.
3 weeks into the war in Ukraine, we continue to look at stories of resistance, including the hundreds of thousands of hackers coming together to fight Russia on the digital frontier. Harlan Coben, the author with over 75 million books in print worldwide, discusses his new novel, The Match, and what it's like to have Netflix at your heel. And we preview the best the small screen has to offer for those looking for some escapism. All that, plus the latest news, views, and analysis.
Mariella Frostrup, this afternoon from 1 on Times Radio. Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Very good afternoon to you. It's Matt Chorley here on Times Radio. We will bring you the best of the rest from PMQs after we've got the very latest news from Nick Ellaby.
Matt, thank you. Good afternoon. The release of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has been confirmed by Iran's judiciary to the Reuters news agency. It's hoped she will shortly board a plane and return to the UK. Nazanin's been detained in Iran on suspicion of spying charges since 2016, something she's always denied. Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner welcomed the news in the Commons.
I'm sure members across the House want to show their support for their families and them. I know the Minister would agree that this devastating situation must never be repeated, and other British nationals still trapped in Iran need to be brought home.
It's understood Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe is with fellow detained British-Iranian national Anousheh Ashuri, a 68-year-old civil engineer. Meanwhile, at PMQs, Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner asked the Deputy Prime Minister about reported British intelligence warnings against granting a peerage to the now Lord Lebedev.
Granting a Russian oligarch, the son and business partner of a KGB spy, a seat here in this Parliament. And it shouldn't matter how much champagne and caviar he serves.
Dominic Raab said all individuals nominated for a peerage have done so in recognition of their contribution to society.
Many of whom in this country are critics of the Putin regime. Live peerages are vetted by the House of Lords Appointments Commission for matters of probity, and frankly, I think she should know better.
In Ukraine, the foreign minister is claiming the mayor of the port city of Skadovsk has been abducted. Alexander Yakovlev and his deputy were allegedly taken earlier. Here, 3 Metropolitan Police officers who work with Sarah Everard's killer have denied sending grossly offensive WhatsApp messages to Wayne Couzens. PC's Jonathan Cobban and William Neville and ex-constable Joel Borders will go on trial in July. And figures show petrol prices have risen again, this time to an average of £1.65 a litre. Data has also revealed the cost of diesel has hit another record too, increasing to £1.76 a litre. Cloudy for most of England, Wales and eastern Scotland, rain at times, becoming heavier and more widespread later for central and eastern England. And Toby Gillis has the sport.
MPs on the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee have concluded that the UK has no hope of hosting Euro 2028 unless the government sets up an independent regulator for football. Times Radio's Alex Dibble has the details.
The committee's released a report into major cultural and sporting events which says that the bid to host the Euros will be fatally undermined if the findings of the independent fan-led review of football are not implemented, a regulator of the sport being the principal recommendation of that review by the former Sports Minister Tracy Crouch.
The Newcastle manager Eddie Howe has revealed the reasons he's refused to discuss geopolitical issues around the owners of the club. Howe has repeatedly been criticised for sidestepping the issue of human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia, especially after 81 people were publicly executed there over the weekend. Some believe it makes him the face of sports washing. Howe insists it's more about a lack of education on his part.
I understand the questions have to be asked. I've got no problem with that. I think, and I've always maintained this, my specialist subject is football. It's what I know, it's what I've trained to do. As soon as I deviate from that into an area where I don't feel qualified to have a huge opinion, I think I go into dangerous ground. So I prefer to stick to what I believe I know.
Captain Heather Knight admits there was a bit of relief as England won for the first time at the Cricket World Cup at the 4th attempt. They beat India by 4 wickets. England must win their final 3 matches to have any chance of reaching the semi-finals, and even that may not be enough. And a significant development in tennis, where it's been announced all 4 Grand Slams will restrict the length of final sets to 12 games from now on. A first to 10 tiebreak will be played at 6 games all, instead of the old rule where a player only won after taking a 2-game lead, no matter how long that took. The new rule will start at the French Open in May, before Wimbledon later in the summer, which was famed for a match lasting 3 days in 2010, when John Isner beat Nicolas Mahut 70-68 in the 5th set. Remember, you can hear 5 races from the Cheltenham Festival, including Tiger Roll's swan song in the cross-country chase, live on Talk Sport today.
This is Times Radio.
From planning your wedding day to moving into your new home, a tax-efficient stocks and shares ISA from John Lewis can help you prepare for all the big milestones to come. Little moments can build big futures. Go to johnlewisfinance.com to find out more. As with all investing, your capital is at risk. Tax treatment depends on individual circumstances and may change in the future. John Lewis Investment Services are provided by Nutmeg Saving and Investment Limited.
Matt Chorley, mid-morning on Times Radio.
A very good afternoon to you. It's Matt Chorley here on Times Radio. We've just done PMQs Unpacked. Angela Rayner versus Dominic Raab. You can listen back to that on the Red Box podcast later. Let's now do the best of the rest. Tim Shipman, chief political commentator from the Sunday Times, is still with me. And it's that time on a Wednesday we all gather around the wireless. It's Ian Blackford.
Woo! Speaker, can I welcome our 4 colleagues from the Parliament of Ukraine who are with us today? We all stand with them. Mr. Speaker, I've spent much of the last week trying to help the Scottish charity Dnipro Kids, established by fans of Hibernian Football Club, who've evacuated 48 children from orphanages in Ukraine and are desperately attempting to provide them with temporary sanctuary in Scotland. Mr. Speaker, there is a plane ready and waiting in Poland to bring these orphans to the UK on Friday, but that flight will leave empty without the necessary paperwork from the Home Office. The Polish authorities, Edinburgh City Council, the Scottish Government and the orphans' guardians are all working to bring these children to safety. I work with UK Government ministers to try and make this happen, and I want to commend Lord Harrington in particular for his efforts. But a week on, the Home Office is still proving to be the only obstacle in the way, and it risks leaving these children stranded. So I'm pleading with the Deputy Prime Minister, remove these obstructions before it's too late. Will he work with me and the Ukrainian authorities to guarantee that these 48 Ukrainian orphans will get on that plane this Friday?
Hear, hear. Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for all he's doing? This is a heart-rending situation. We want to do everything we can. Of course, there are a range of issues in this case, including the wishes of the Ukrainian government on where orphan children should go and should be living, whether any necessary permissions have been sought from the Ukrainian and/or Polish governments. This isn't actually about bureaucracy, it's about genuine safeguarding issues, but I certainly want to work with him in the best interests of those children.
Ian Blackford.
So there we are. I mean, it was the first time Angela Rayner didn't touch on the refugee crisis today.
No, and actually,
interestingly,
I think
Keir Starmer didn't last week either.
No, and this, I think, to build on what we were talking about earlier, yes, they want everybody to note in the Labour Party that, they're going on security. But banging on about immigration and gets to have more people coming to Britain is very popular with the Southern intelligentsia, and they know that from every focus group and poll they do, that it is still something that is held in suspicion by a lot of the people whose votes they're going to want at the next general election. People think it's nice and good to bring Ukrainians here, and, many people will agree with that who are listening to Times Radio. But in a lot of those northern seats, immigration is a third rail of politics. It's difficult, and the fact that it's left to the SNP rather than the Labour Party to do it, it's a very interesting development. I mean, that was it was a constructive question, and I think a reasonably constructive answer from Rob. As ever, these things are slightly more complicated than are made out on the surface, but sounds like there's a genuine effort to make this happen, and let's hope it does.
I mean, it is interesting that on Labour voters, in the Times YouGov poll this week, 71% of Labour voters from 2019 said not enough has been done to help refugees come from Ukraine. 47% of Conservatives. So I suppose there is that difference if you're trying to reach into 2019 Conservative voters. But I mean...
But that's also in the abstract. Is enough being done for the Ukrainians? It's quite easy to say no, but when you say we want to find homes for 100,000 of them, that's when it becomes a more pertinent political issue, I think.
Yeah. And but I don't know, it's cynical, isn't it? Anyway, it is interesting that 2 weeks running now, the Labour Party have left those questions to others to raise. Let's now hear from the Labour MP, Matt Weston. He was interested in Boris Johnson's relationship with Russian oligarchs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Deputy Prime Minister will agree with me that when it comes to judging a person, it's often done by the company that they keep. When it comes to tennis, when it comes to tennis, the Prime Minister enjoys the company of and backhanders of Lyubov Chernikov. When it came to celebrating the election victory, the Prime Minister prioritised the party hosted by the former KGB agent Alexander Lebedev. He has a great many others, such as Viktor Fedotov and Alex Temerko as friends. Can he therefore tell us what first attracted the Prime Minister to the billionaire Russian oligarchs?
Mr. Prime Minister.
I wasn't quite sure where he was going at the beginning of his question, but what I can tell him, of course, the Prime Minister is not just a very social individual.
There's a soundbite for the ages.
He wants his country to be open, outward-looking to the world. But we were the government, and he was the Prime Minister, and I was the Foreign Secretary, that introduced the Sergei Magnitsky sanctions that put human rights sanctions, asset freeze and visa bans, not just on Russians where we have evidence of wrongdoing, but also the murderers of Khashoggi, also the persecutors of the Myanmar minority and many others. It was this government, not the Labour Party.
Hurry up, Baldwin!
We were talking earlier about what will the history books remember this PMQs for. The Deputy Prime Minister is saying the Prime Minister is a very sociable individual may well be the one thing.
I think that's the thing people will remember, absolutely. I mean, that was quite a good question. It was done with some humour and channeling Mrs Merton, who, of course, once asked Debbie McGee, what first attracted you to the millionaire Paul Daniels? And it was a...
Very good. We finally found your impression. Patrick Maguire does Lindsay Hoyle and you do Mrs Merton.
There we go. And the backhanders of Lyubov Chernikov was quite a nice way of linking Russian money and tennis together. But Dominic Raab may live to regret that when the results of the Partygate inquiry come out. A very social individual.
Very social individual. Just before we let you go, Tim, where is Dominic Raab in the sort of grand pecking order of the government? I mean, he is Deputy Prime Minister.
He is the Deputy Prime Minister, Matt.
But he was given that
very
job
keen
when
to be called that
bumped
too.
out of the Foreign Office.
Yes. And, I mean, you know, the question arises if Boris Johnson fell under a bus. Dominic Raab, at one stage in 2019, looked like he might mount a serious challenge for the leadership. The second the Tories imploded in the European elections, the party all sort of flocked to Boris Johnson to save them. He's quite popular with some people on the Brexiteer right, but I think he's probably had his go, and if there's a contest, he probably won't stand again. And he's been rather eclipsed by Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, and there are others who may not be quite at his level of elevation yet, but are certainly on the rise, the Nadeem Zahawi and people like that, who are much more likely to actually have a crack at being the next Prime Minister.
There's not much you can do about it, but whatever it is that you think he brings, someone else brings it better.
Yeah, I mean, he's, I think most people would say he's, apart from the muck-ups over Afghanistan, that he's a relatively subdued, safe-ish pair of hands, but he's not an inspirational figure, and he's, as we've seen today, he's someone who plays a dead bat at the dispatch box. He's not one to open up a flourishing cover drive very often.
Very good, from tennis to cricket and then everything in between. Tim Shipman, lovely to see you as ever. Tim is the chief political commentator for the Sunday Times. You can read his fine work in the paper and, of course, online every weekend. Right, this match on Times Radio. Up next, we'll bring you the very latest on the situation with Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and Anousheh Ashouri, who are believed to have left Iran under some reports. We're giving you the very latest next here on Times Radio.
Wake up to Britain's brightest early breakfast with Callum MacDonald on Times Radio with Nutmeg, the digital wealth manager. Thought-provoking analysis, insight and debate as the day's biggest stories break. Plus, get all the latest economic and financial news expertly unpacked in the dedicated Daily Business Bulletin. Early breakfast with Callum MacDonald tomorrow morning from 5 on Times Radio in association with Nutmeg, the digital wealth manager. Put your money where your mind is. As with all investing, your capital is at risk.
30 million people around the world are just like me.
And 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 me.
And
me. I value knowing that my investment firm has been recommended by which?
Not once.
Not twice. But 3 years in a row.
Join the 30 million investors around the world who value getting Vanguard value.
Couldn't have said it
better myself. Vanguard. Value to investors. When investing your capital